Ascent Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Cultural Intelligence in the 21st Century, Driving Inclusion, Revenue, and ESG, by Stephan M. Branch, MBA, CEO. Narrated by Perry Daniels. Introduction. If you are a CEO or a manager, or you work on a team in a global organization, raising your cultural intelligence by learning 9 cultural competencies will transform every part of your business, including how you develop strategy, how you lead, how you win business, how you interact with your customers, how you build your brand, how you market, and yes, how you build cultures of inclusion on a global scale, while simultaneously increasing your ESG, environmental, social, and governance rating, revenue, and overall company valuation. The S in ESG isn't only about social equity. It's also about understanding the importance of how business gets done in other countries. Did you know you can resolve both while having a transformative financial impact on your organization? How can you build a globally inclusive culture in an organization where everyone feels seen, heard, and respected if you don't even understand how cultures communicate differently, build relationships differently, and cultivate trust and respect differently? In recent years, organizations have become fixated on ESG because they recognize that the millennial generation is largely focused on investing in companies that have higher ESG ratings, as those organizations better align with their philosophies and their desire to do good things with their money. No doubt the Z and Alpha generations feel the same way. Global 2000 companies know this and are redirecting much of their focus to the S in ESG in order to drive up their ESG ratings. Historically, it has been much more challenging to demonstrate improvement in the S because of a lack of metrics that show an increase in a quantifiable and verifiable way. Who cares, you may ask? Well, higher ESG ratings typically mean higher share prices and higher company valuation. Global 2000 companies know this, which is why there has been such an intense focus on this recently. That's also why European and Asian companies are now becoming more focused on creating cultures of belonging and inclusion necessary to drive up their ESG ratings. They now recognize that this conversation is much more important than they thought, and they see how it's impacting the company's share price. They no longer see this as just a U.S. discussion. I've lived on 5 continents and worked in well over 50 countries with full P&L responsibilities in both privately held and publicly traded multi-billion-dollar companies. I've taken companies public while simultaneously creating the explosive growth required to meet the very high expectations of investors and boards. Jack Welch, retired chairman and CEO of General Electric, sat on the board of one of those companies early in my career, so I know from first-hand experience the pressure to deliver results. Throughout my career, people have wondered how I could deliver those results so quickly. They have often said I made it look so easy. The secret has, and always will be, that I fully grasp how leadership, cultural intelligence, and inclusion coalesce to create extraordinary leaders with the capacity to make a transformative impact on the business and the bottom line. When I coach business leaders on the Fortune 1000, they often tell me that their HR leaders are clueless because they don't fully understand the day-to-day business challenges involved in leading global teams and working in other countries. I often find that the 3 most critical challenges global leaders identify as they lead while trying to simultaneously create inclusive cultures and build significant revenue growth are the following: working across cultures in different parts of the world, establishing team effectiveness and cohesion, especially for global teams, and understanding business norms in other cultures and how those norms play out in the business units. However, Ask almost any HR leader, and they will say that their leadership program is so well developed that they don't need to understand how business is done differently in other cultures. Another one that always brings a smile to my face is when they say, "We do things our way," or "We do things the XYZ company way," or "We do things the Dutch, German, Japanese, etc. way." To those organizations, I'd suggest you may have chosen the wrong people to sit in those global HR roles. They are missing a crucial part of the equation if they don't understand how country culture impacts an entire organization, including global leadership, team effectiveness, and team cohesion. This is alarming because talent, L&D, and diversity officers function as internal consultants supporting the business units, and these leaders are short on time. They need just-in-time learning to solve specific business problems. Without the support of an HR team that fully understands the impact cultural differences have on the business, leaders are left to their own devices to figure it out. So that is precisely what we will do together in this book. Chapter 1. Globalization made cultural assumptions of the 20th century obsolete. Many members of today's business world still rely on cultural norms and social conclusions that were drawn in the second half of the 20th century. During this period, most companies were just beginning to globalize their activities and staffing. This was a time that preceded the widespread use of the Internet, social media, and any kind of conversation about cultural differences or inclusion in the workplace. The criteria used in the late 20th century for looking at culture assumed that every individual from a given country acted, believed, and worked similarly. Yet in today's business world, we do business more and more in other countries. Today's hyperconnectivity defies any map and any politician's proclamation. The trend was accelerated as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. This has caused companies to create organizational structures of remote workers in multiple locations that would have previously been thought too diverse for team cohesion. In the 21st century, we are living in a place where someone sitting late at night in their living room in Athens can watch the news at sunrise in Sydney, live online. We live in a time of digital nomads, able to legally work in far-flung countries that are completely dissimilar from their own. We live in a time of increased awareness of those who may be disadvantaged based on their identity and circumstances. This includes everything from striving to achieve an appropriate gender balance at the board level to recognizing the employees of an enterprise who may be confined to a wheelchair or a member of the LGBTQ+ community. In short, we live on a planet where fewer people fit into routine cultural and social categories. The future belongs to companies that take an inclusive approach to their economic governance, the environment, and the social aspects of everything they do. As stated earlier, these criteria are commonly abbreviated as ESG, when defined as the key factors enabling a business to thrive. Companies are ultimately a reflection of the people that work within them. The key frontline stakeholders of any business are its employees. Therefore, the benefits and rewards of paying attention to the cultural and social structure of the enterprise, the S of the ESG equation, can significantly outweigh the effort involved in the journey to genuine inclusion. Direct benefits include the enhanced dedication and productivity of the employees who truly feel part of the organization. Rewards include an improved ESG rating, which can raise the share price of the company because it attracts more investors. A high-profile example is that of the coffeehouse chain Starbucks, which maintains a hiring policy that is as broad and inclusive as possible worldwide. In the United States, the company introduced a policy aimed at the recruitment of veterans. In Europe, Starbucks extends a hand to displaced individuals who are far from their home countries. The attention to the S of the equation is a significant contributor to the company's success. The global profits of Starbucks have increased by 30.4% on average since 2020. The practice of treating employees inclusively was observed by Howard Schultz, the interim CEO of Starbucks, as being something that should not be viewed as an added cost that cuts into profits, but as a powerful energizer that can grow the enterprise into something far greater than one leader could envision. Enhanced cultural and social awareness leads to direct business success. As Mr. Schultz states, it is ultimately a catalyst for profit growth, rather than a drain on the enterprise. It vastly improves the effectiveness of the leadership team, which in turn maximizes the performance of employees. This produces a stronger brand image for the company and generates increased sales and, thus, revenue. A positive side effect is improved negotiations with global suppliers, which brings a decrease in operational costs. Today's business innovators are therefore those who are able and empowered to recognize the cultural differences in those they lead, no matter where their colleagues may be geographically or how big their teams may be. Successful business leaders in the 21st century are those who can use their cultural and social competency to embrace a holistic approach throughout the enterprise. The results and benefits of this soon become apparent. Chapter 2. Culture and Commerce in the 21st Century. Globalization can be defined as the process by which businesses and organizations operate on an international scale. Due to the increased accessibility of commercial air travel and shipping containers in the second half of the 20th century, major companies were able to adopt a worldwide corporate strategy that increased the pace and range of globalization to a degree unimaginable by corporate leaders even 50 years before. As such, international companies were required to become aware of the cultural differences of the countries in which they operated. Naturally, those companies needed a framework by which they could begin to understand the cultural dimensions. This understanding of the dimensions was derived from studies among corporate employees. The countries of the world were each characterized by standard actions and values. While not factually incorrect, these conclusions can nevertheless be classified as stereotypes. The corporate leaders of the day understood that countries with similar historical backgrounds and a common language tend to possess cultural similarities. They understood that these countries with a shared border tend to be more akin in cultural terms than those that are far apart geographically. Added to this basic premise were standard cultural observations about such dimensions as hierarchy and timekeeping. These cultural norms were assumed to apply to every member of society in a given country. These conclusions offered a partial insight into cultural and social issues that were useful to the corporate leaders of the late 20th century. Then came the 21st century and the widespread use of the Internet in every corner of the world. This would cause globalization to exponentially accelerate in a way that would touch everyone. Globalization was no longer just about corporate assumptions and policy, for it had begun to reach individuals in myriad ways outside of the workplace and in their daily lives. Yet many of the cultural and social assumptions of the business world are still essentially tied to the belief that, for instance, everyone in the United States thinks one way, or that all Germans are culturally and socially identical. This is no longer viable in today's business world, for the narrative has moved on. Thanks to both large-scale international migration and local societal changes, demographic landscapes are changing in countless ways and countless locations. While some may resist this new reality of globalization, there is no going back to the 20th century. Today's hyperconnectivity across borders is too powerful and popular, a force to be undone. The successful business leaders of the future will be those who recognize this. Large-scale cultural migrations. There have been a number of examples of large-scale international migrations in the late 20th century and early 21st century. It is useful to look at two of them to appreciate how the cultural assumptions involving the countries at each end of the migrant's journey are not automatically or universally applicable in such scenarios. 1. Greeks in Australia. Greek settlers first arrived in Australia in the gold rush days of the 1850s. However, in the 1950s and 1960s, that migration from Greece to Australia increased exponentially. A migration scheme adopted by the Australian government was designed to increase the population of the country following the Second World War. While many Greek Australians hold on to what they call politikos mas, our culture, what constitutes Greek tradition in the host country has adapted and evolved. Meanwhile, Greece itself continues to evolve in the absence of those that have left the country. Therefore, some of the closely held traditions of the diaspora may be found to be out of date in Greece they have left behind. This means that routine cultural assumptions about Australia and Greece do not accurately reflect the individuals involved at both ends of the migratory flow. This can be a critical misjudgment, given that Melbourne is today the largest Greek city outside of Greece itself. Some 10% of its population of 5 million people are of Greek origin, and therefore do not readily fit into any routine categorization of Australian culture. Case study. Kostas recently migrated from Athens to Sydney to become a junior doctor in one of the city's hospitals. He was happy to find that, while smaller than the Greek community in Melbourne, Sydney provided plenty of opportunities to connect with Greeks who had migrated there in the middle of the 20th century. At the same time, Kostas found that the characteristics of these elder Greek migrants most closely associated with their cultural identities, such as membership in the Greek Orthodox Church and enjoyment of traditional music, were more prominent in Sydney than they now were in the Athens of the 21st century. Kostas found that the first-generation offspring of the mid-20th century Greek migrants were integrated into mainstream Australian culture and society. Nonetheless, the mentioned aspects of the Greek lifestyle were still emphasized as important, even by the younger first-generation individuals in Australia more than by young people in Greece today. This highlights the fact that cultures and societies are in a state of constant flux. For instance, since the large-scale migration of Greeks to Australia in the mid-20th century, Greece has become a fully integrated member state of the European Union, EU. This has impacted Greek cultural norms, given the high level of migration within EU member states by outbound Greeks and inbound EU nationals. 2. Worldwide expatriates in Dubai. There are also more continuous international movements of persons that take place over long periods of time. One example is the steady increase of foreign nationals going to live and work in Dubai. The primary commercial hub of the United Arab Emirates, UAE, Dubai has the highest number of resident expatriates of any city in the world, measured as a percentage of its population. In 1975, 64% of the city's residents were foreign nationals. Today, some 85% of the population of Dubai was born in some other country. The largest number of resident expatriates in the city hail from Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan. Many British, French, Filipino, South African, and United States nationals call Dubai home. This kaleidoscope of cultures is definitely not reflected in standard cultural categorizations of the UAE. This, therefore, means that some 3 million people are being excluded from any common cultural assumptions of the country. Case study. Christine is a U.S. American who has lived in Dubai for many years. She serves as the managing director of a Santa Fe relocation. The employees of the company's Dubai office represent no less than 15 nationalities: American, Argentinian, Belgian, British, Filipino, Hungarian, Indian, Iranian, Irish, Kazakhstani, Polish, Romanian, Russian, South African, Spanish, and Ukrainian. As is typical of business leaders in Dubai, Christine has to remain mindful, daily, of the various cultures involved in managing her staff. At the same time, Christine works consistently toward team cohesion. To do so, she makes sure that the team members are aware of each other's cultural differences. Concurrently, Christine uses this mutual understanding to create a unique internal culture within the employee group based on common values and the goals of the enterprise. 21st Century Cultural Catalysts. We can see that the world is no longer fitting into the cultural boxes that have become so comfortable for corporate leaders to assume. While the world's countries are still being conveniently categorized by assumed cultural norms that date from the 20th century, humanity is on the move. People are increasingly inhabiting parts of the world outside their country of origin. The Internet enables companies to strive for team cohesion among remote workers in disparate locations. Simultaneously, the Internet is globalizing the mindsets of those who may never have even lived in a foreign country. Three major phenomena can be observed that highlight the ever-quickening evolution of cultural interaction in the 21st century: the COVID-19 pandemic, the emergence of digital nomad visas, and the rise of the economic and political entity that is the European Union. All have served to accelerate intercultural exposure and the need for inclusive work practices to be introduced in global companies. 1. The COVID-19 pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic required companies worldwide to suddenly function with almost their entire office staff working via a laptop at home. Indeed, the European Union hurriedly published guidelines in 24 languages regarding cyber safety for remote workers. Although cultural factors were critical to team success, international managers often found them difficult to discern. Examples included unease among those suddenly working full-time in a language that is different from their mother tongue, unease among those who are not comfortable with fully expressing themselves to a group that includes more senior associates, disparities between remote international team members in the perceived importance of punctuality, disparities in the propensity of remote international team members to work productively on their own, unease among those of more traditional cultures in fully expressing themselves to a group that includes senior female associates. These factors impacted remote team members' performance and contributed to employee enthusiasm and a sense of belonging to the organization. As we have seen, the remote manager faces cultural and practical challenges in being effective with a diverse team of remote employees. All this is taking place in a business environment in which the number of employees working remotely will remain at levels that were unimaginable before the pandemic. By fully understanding the cultural background of team members, the manager can better appreciate, even from a distance, how each person is processing their local circumstances. As such, a distinct culture and motivational workspace for all team members can be created. Thus, despite all challenges, success can still be achieved when managing a remote international team. Good global leaders took the time during the pandemic to learn about the home cultures of remote team members. Excellent leaders went so far as to consult with each remote team member in terms of their personal cultural background and life experiences. This has led the remote manager to better understand a diverse team, and therefore to focus on what its members may have in common, whatever the culture or geography involved. Simultaneously, it is imperative for remote managers to fully understand themselves from a cultural standpoint. Knowing one's own cultural propensity in terms of such dimensions as communication, hierarchy, and relationships has an enormous impact on the way one leads and manages a global team. It is only when we are aware of our assumptions and biases that we can understand those of a different culture. It should be noted that our cultural propensity comes not only from the country in which we are born, but from all the experiences we may have had in our lives. The British national who has been living in Greece for 20 years is no longer going to have the cultural profile of a British person. Studies have shown that such actions can lead to a 56% increase in job performance and a 50% reduction in turnover. This means that the ability of managers to be effective across cultural, social, and geographical boundaries, as invisible in the virtual environment as they are real, is critical to business success. It is estimated that 70% of international companies offer their employees the ongoing opportunity to work remotely at least part of the time. Remote working across vast distances is here to stay, even as the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic becomes an ever more distant memory. 2. Digital nomad visas. The sheer scale of the recent pandemic forced businesses to adjust their worldwide working methods, and it has led governments on every continent to look at their own practices and procedures. The most international aspect of routine governmental activity, the management of inbound immigration, has witnessed an unexpected development: the presence of an ever-increasing number of digital nomads in the global workforce. Digital nomads are independent workers who embrace a location-independent, technology-enabled lifestyle that allows them to travel and work remotely anytime and anywhere they choose. Research shows that the United States alone has 4.8 million employed people who classify themselves as digital nomads, whether they are working remotely within the United States or not. The trends already mentioned, coupled with the growth of online talent marketplaces and online information sites, have enabled more and more people to choose the digital nomad lifestyle. They tend to be a diverse group of no single generation, profession, or socio-economic background. Research shows that just over half of the world's digital nomads are older than 40 years of age and are split more or less evenly between full and part-time workers. With all these factors in mind, some of the world's governments have even taken the steps of inventing a specific work visa to attract digital nomads to their country. The visa holders do not need to be employed in their territory in any way. However, by stipulating a certain income level, governments taking this path feel that the expenditure of digital nomads in the local economy makes the issuance of such visas worthwhile. They usually stipulate that the digital nomad possesses an international health insurance policy that covers the country involved to avoid any burden on local health systems. The number of countries offering this kind of work permit is growing yearly. Bermuda offers a Work from Bermuda visa, which allows remote workers to stay in the country for up to 1 year. Applicants must own a location-independent business and work remotely from a company based outside Bermuda, although there is no minimum income requirement. The Czech Republic offers a digital nomad visa called the Živno, which is valid for 1 year but can be extended. Applicants must be active in one of 80 government-approved professions in order to be deemed eligible for the visa. Applicants must provide proof of prearranged accommodation for at least 1 year, have a certain minimum amount in their bank account, and pay a small monthly amount in local taxes. Applicants must make an in-person appointment at their nearest Czech embassy or consulate. Dubai offers a digital nomad visa with an initial validity of 1 year, with the option to extend for a second successive year. There is a minimum salary requirement. Proof of private international health insurance for the UAE is also necessary. Estonia was the first country to create a 1-year visa that allows foreigners to live in the country while working remotely. Applicants must work for a company based outside Estonia and provide proof of having met a minimum salary requirement.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?